Have you noticed something strange happening in Europe? Countries that were once historic allies are changing course, and unexpected new partnerships are forming. But why? In this video, we'll uncover the hidden forces behind Europe's shifting alliances. What's really driving these changes and how they could directly impact your safety, your money, and even the future of your region. Do you still trust Europe's stability? Do you believe NATO and the European Union will continue as they are? What if we told you silent moves are underway, signaling a new order, where military, economic, and strategic interests are colliding behind closed doors? If you're interested in geopolitics, the global economy, or simply want to understand what might change your life in the coming years, stay until the end. Because what's happening in Europe right now is the beginning of a new era, and understanding it will put you steps ahead of the rest of the world. After World War II, Europe was split between two major forces, the United States and its NATO, allies on one side, and the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact on the other. This division shaped the continent for decades. European countries aligned militarily and economically based on this bloc logic. The Cold War solidified ideological borders, but everything began to shift with the fall of the Berlin Wall. In the 1990s, the idea of a united Europe gained traction. The creation of the European Union and NATO's expansion were seen as signs of a new stability. Eastern European nations, once Soviet satellites, rushed to integrate with the West. The promise was security, prosperity, and belonging. For a while, it seemed like everyone was heading in the same direction. But that stability was fragile. The 2008 financial crisis exposed deep economic divides between Northern and Southern Europe. The 2015 migration crisis triggered clashes over borders and values. The idea of a unified European project began to crumble, replaced by competing national interests under one roof. Cohesion started cracking from within, and many began to ask, who really controls Europe? The UK's exit from the EU was the first major shock. Brexit proved that even solid alliances could fall apart. Other countries began flirting with nationalism and Euroscepticism. Internal movements gained strength, questioning even the legitimacy of institutions like the European Commission. It marked the end of the era of automatic alliances. Today, the world is no longer bipolar. China's rise, Russia's aggression, and internal instability in the US are forcing Europe to make new choices. Who will be its main ally in the future? Who can it trust in the event of war, an energy crisis, or economic collapse? A story once thought to be over is being rewritten, and old blocks are giving way to a new geopolitical chessboard. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 exposed deep cracks among European nations. While countries like Poland and the Baltic states called for a hardline response, others like Hungary and Serbia took a softer, even pro-Russia stance. The European unity narrative turned out to be more rhetoric than reality. Disagreements over sanctions, military aid, and energy dependency weakened the common front. Each country began playing its own game. Meanwhile, the rise of far-right parties in Italy, France, Hungary, and Germany has shifted the internal debate. Many of these parties advocate for a more nationalist foreign policy, less aligned with US or EU interests. This directly impacts how alliances like NATO function. Fears over immigration, rejection of green policies, and a renewed focus on sovereignty are shaping new national priorities, which often clash with international commitments. Energy has been another major fault line. Europe discovered just how dependent it was on Russian gas, and attempts to cut those ties caused internal shocks. Germany, for instance, hesitated and suffered major economic impacts. Other nations turned to Chinese or Arab alternatives. This scramble for individual solutions weakened Europe's collective stance and exposed hidden vulnerabilities. Turkey's role has added even more confusion. A NATO member with deep ties to Russia and China, Turkey has acted like a double agent, blocking strategic alliance decisions while negotiating bilateral deals with authoritarian regimes. This raises questions about mutual trust among allies and shows that European geopolitics is no longer black and white. Internally, a new split has formed between old Europe and New Europe. France and Germany aim to preserve traditional leadership, but countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, and the Baltics are growing more assertive. They want a voice, influence, and independence. The balance of power within Europe itself is being contested. And as that happens, alliances once thought eternal are being quietly reassessed. Hungary and Russia have become central to a realignment that openly defies the EU's official stance. Viktor Orban praises Putin, maintains energy ties, and resists sanctions. This isn't just diplomacy, it's strategy. Hungary is positioning itself as a bridge between East and West, and its example could inspire others to explore alternative paths. Turkey, though part of NATO, no longer acts like a predictable ally. Recep Tayyip Erdogan simultaneously negotiates with Moscow, Beijing, Brussels, and Washington without fully committing to any. He bought Russian weapons, vetoed NATO applications, and signed billion-dollar deals with China. This multipolar posture is becoming a model for other European nations with their own ambitions, and it breaks the Cold War's binary logic. France has tried to emerge as the leader of a sovereign Europe. Emmanuel Macron has stated that Europe must depend less on the US for security. His vision includes creating a European army and an independent diplomatic stance. Though far from reality, this idea is gaining traction in uncertain times, especially among those who no longer trust American protection. Meanwhile, countries like Italy and Greece have deepened ties with China. Through infrastructure investments and strategic partnerships, Beijing is gaining influence within the continent. The Belt and Road Initiative opened doors that the US failed to close. This new dependency could shift Europe's geopolitical balance, making China an unavoidable player in internal decisions. Most concerning of all, these new alliances are forming without coordination or collective debate. Each country is acting alone, driven by short-term interests. This makes Europe more fragmented and vulnerable to external pressure. The vision of a united bloc is fading fast, and the risk that these micro-alliances will clash with each other is growing. For decades, the United States was the pillar of European security, with military presence, financial aid, and diplomatic power ensuring continental stability. But in recent years, that relationship has started to fray. Washington's priorities have shifted toward the Indo-Pacific and containing China. Europe is no longer the center of strategic focus. This shift became clear with the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and its hesitant stance on the war in Ukraine. Though the US supported Kyiv, many Europeans realized that help has limits, and that in future conflicts, American support might be delayed or absent altogether. This has created a growing sense of insecurity among allies and fueled calls for European military autonomy. At the same time, the US has been pressuring Europe to spend more on defense. Trump was blunt, accusing countries like Germany of not paying their share. Biden kept the same message, just more diplomatically. This constant pressure has strained the relationship. Many Europeans feel the US wants control without risk, and that raises a tough question. How much longer is it worth relying on Washington? Trade disputes have further strained ties. American sanctions against allies, economic protectionism, and competition over energy and tech have all created friction. The US-Europe relationship has become more transactional than strategic. Countries like France and Germany now openly talk about creating alternatives to US-dominated agreements. The idea of an unconditional alliance is no longer a given. This distance has created space for new influences. As the US focuses on China and the Pacific, Europe becomes an open field. Russia, China, Turkey, and even Gulf states are stepping in to fill the vacuum. Without a reliable protector, European countries are being forced to redraw their ties, and the global order we once knew is quietly being replaced by something far less defined. One possible future is a Europe divided into internal blocs. On one side, countries like France, Germany, and Spain trying to preserve EU cohesion. On the other, nations like Hungary, Poland, and Turkey moving toward more independence. This could create a two-speed Europe with different levels of integration, possibly marking the beginning of the end for continental unity. Another likely scenario is the weakening of NATO as a global deterrent. If some countries begin to ignore military commitments or block strategic decisions, trust among members will erode. That could lead to parallel or bilateral alliances outside NATO's umbrella. The US might even pull further away from the continent, and Europe will have to choose, defend itself or fall apart. China's influence is set to grow. Investments, technology, loans, and partnerships will continue to tempt struggling nations. If Beijing secures structural control over critical sectors like energy, ports, and telecoms, it could shape European policy without firing a shot. This shifts the power dynamic toward invisible economic domination. There's also a risk of internal conflicts among European countries. Competition over energy resources, trade routes, or immigration may trigger serious diplomatic tensions. The lack of clear leadership or shared goals makes it worse. Europe could become a stage for recurring mini-crises, and those crises could be exploited by external powers to further weaken the continent. Finally, the European public might lose faith in alliances altogether. If citizens feel their governments no longer represent their international interests, support for projects like the EU or NATO could vanish. This could open the door to populist leaders, political ruptures, or even exit referendums. In just a few years, Europe's geopolitical map might become unrecognizable, and the world will need to adjust to that new reality. Europe is changing, not with bullets or tanks, but through silent decisions, unexpected alliances, and diverging interests. What was once predictable is now uncertain. And if even the strongest alliances are being re-evaluated, what guarantees your safety, your freedom, or your future? As blocks fall apart and new powers rise, the world we know could disappear, quietly, without warning. The real war might not be between nations, but between narratives, dependencies, and poorly calculated decisions. So I ask you, is your country ready for a world where old allies no longer show up? Or will it just be another disposable piece on the new global chessboard? If this video opened your eyes, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to understand what's happening, and subscribe, because in the next few weeks, we'll keep exposing what no one dares to say out loud.